Last Tuesday at exactly 7:14 a.m. The president of our HOA, Cheryl Whitmore, a bleach-blonde menace in a leopard print windbreaker, drove her oversized white Escalade through the middle of my garden. Not next to it, not just grazing it, right through it. I was standing on my porch, coffee in hand, watching in slow motion as her tires flattened my irises, crushed my tomato cages, and left deep ruts in the soft dirt I just tilled the night before. Then, like nothing happened, she parked across the sidewalk, got out, and started yelling at my mailbox. "Thomas Caldwell," she barked, tapping her acrylics against the side of the box like it owed her money. "Your grass is half an inch too long. The HOA standards require a uniform cut." "I've sent 2 notices," I blinked. "You just drove through my garden." She turned, squinting at the wreckage. "That was on common use land. The HOA owns that patch." "No," I said, walking down the steps. "That's clearly on my side of the marker. I've got the plat map in the garage." "Don't sass me, Thomas. I have a board meeting in 20 minutes. Then she got back in her SUV, reversed over what was left of my marigolds for good measure, and peeled off. That night, I pulled out the property line documents. Sure enough, the garden was fully on my lot. Cheryl was either blind or lying through her capped teeth. The next day, I called the city to confirm the markers. The guy who answered chuckled when I gave him my address. "Oh, that HOA. You're not the first." By Friday, I'd installed a little fence, some decorative rocks, and a dozen galvanized steel spikes painted to blend with the soil buried just beneath the soft dirt along the edge of the garden. Not sharp enough to kill a tire outright. Just enough to teach a lesson if she tried it again. It took exactly 3 days. Monday morning, 6:52 a.m. I was in the kitchen eating toast when I heard the telltale hum of her Escalade's V8. I stepped out just in time to see her veer off the driveway and hit my garden again. The crunch of metal and the hiss of air were glorious. She slammed on the brakes, jumped out of the car, and stared at her front left tire, now fully deflated and sagging into the dirt. "What the hell did you do?" she screamed, spinning toward me. I sipped my coffee. "Looks like you drove over something sharp, again, on my property." "That's tampering, sabotage. I'm calling the HOA. You are the HOA." She narrowed her eyes like a cartoon villain. "Don't think this is over, Thomas." "Oh, I'm counting on it," I said. By the time Cheryl's Escalade got towed out of my garden, she'd already left a voicemail for every board member, and according to my neighbor, Greg stormed into a local tire shop demanding they bill the HOA for damages caused by unauthorized landscaping sabotage. That same afternoon, I found a bright orange violation notice taped to my front door. It read like it had been written by someone mid-tantrum. "Unauthorized installation of hazardous materials on common property," it said. "Immediate removal required. Fine, $600. I read it twice, then folded it neatly in half and slid it into a plastic sleeve, which I thumbtacked to a stake beside the crushed tomato cages like a little exhibit in a museum labeled Exhibit A Delusion. At precisely 7:30 the next morning, Cheryl returned. This time she was on foot and dragging behind her a man in a boxy brown blazer who looked like he'd been roused too early and against his will. He held a clipboard in one hand and a measuring tape in the other. "Tom, this is Colin from Municipal Code Enforcement," she said, like she was introducing a celebrity. "He's here to document the violation." Colin gave me an apologetic half-nod. "She said there was a safety hazard on city land." I gestured toward the painted property marker, still intact and clearly visible just beside the fence post. "This is my land, verified by the county office. Want the paperwork?" Cheryl cut in before he could answer. "The HOA declared that strip a shared use zone in last year's amendment." "You mean the amendment you tried to pass after the deadline without a quorum?" I asked. Colin blinked. "Wait, what?" I stepped inside and came back with a black binder. Page 12. HOA bylaws require 2/3 homeowner approval for any land reclassification. Only 10 votes were cast. I keep receipts. Colin took the binder and flipped through it, his brows furrowed. This doesn't look legal. It's not, I said. Cheryl's lips compressed into a line so tight it looked like she was chewing on a lemon rind. This is a matter for the board, not city code. Colin handed the binder back. Actually, it is a zoning issue if you're enforcing rules on private property. I'll need to escalate this. She turned to him, voice rising. I'm the HOA president, I have authority. You don't have judicial authority, he replied flatly. Cheryl left without another word. Colin followed her, already dialing a number on his phone. I didn't hear the conversation, but I saw him gesture toward my garden, then toward her Escalade still parked 2 houses down with a temporary spare on one side and a noticeable lien. 2 days later, I received a letter from the city's zoning department. It confirmed my property boundaries and formally advised the HOA to cease enforcement attempts on my lot. I made 10 copies and handed them out at the next HOA meeting conveniently scheduled in Cheryl's backyard under her oversized pergola, where she liked to hold court with lemonade in monogram tumblers. She tried to gavel me out of the meeting, but half the homeowners had already read the letter. One of them, Marcy from Lot 5, stood up and asked aloud why we were paying fees into a system that couldn't even follow its own rules. Things unraveled quickly after that. The next morning, I got a knock on my door. It was Greg, who lived across the street and worked nights as a mechanic. He held up a flash drive. You have to see the footage I caught on my driveway cam, he said. It's about Cheryl. We watched it together on my laptop. The footage showed Cheryl sneaking into the side yard of Lot 11 at nearly midnight, dragging a garbage bag full of something bulky. A minute later, she dumped the bag behind a rose bush, took a few photos with her phone, then left. The homeowner of Lot 11, Alois, an elderly widow with a cautious gait and a love of wind chimes, had received a violation that week for excessive refuse on lawn. She'd been confused, said she hadn't put anything there. Now we had proof. Can I borrow this? I asked Greg. Already emailed it to myself, he said. Use it however you want. I didn't wait. I went straight to Alois and showed her the footage. Her eyes got wide, then misty. She said I might lose access to the community shuttle if I didn't clean it up, she whispered. I didn't know what to do. We called the police. An officer came by that afternoon, reviewed the footage, and took statements from both me and Alois. Cheryl showed up halfway through, demanding to know why a patrol car was on her street without HOA clearance. The officer didn't even look up. Ma'am, you may want to speak with your attorney. By the end of the week, a formal investigation was opened into Cheryl's conduct. I heard through one of the board members that the HOA's funds were being audited. Apparently, someone noticed discrepancies in the landscaping budget, namely, that over $12,000 had been allocated to beautification projects that didn't seem to exist. And then came the bombshell. During a routine city audit triggered by the zoning complaint, it was discovered that Cheryl had forged signatures on last year's HOA amendment vote specifically to reclassify several perimeter lots as shared property, which would have allowed her to push through a new development plan with a contractor her cousin owned. The city launched a formal inquiry. Cheryl, now in full panic mode, tried to claim it was an administrative error, but multiple homeowners came forward, swearing they never signed anything. At the emergency board meeting, she arrived late, flanked by 2 lawyers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She tried to argue procedural mishaps, but it was too late. The board voted unanimously to suspend her presidency pending the investigation. I didn't say a word during the vote. I just handed out laminated copies of the zoning letter and one of Greg's screenshots of her midnight dumping escapade. The room stayed quiet except for the humming of the ceiling fan and the rustle of paper. When Cheryl stood to leave, she locked eyes with me. "This isn't over," she said through clenched teeth. I tilted my head slightly. "You're right. Now it's a criminal investigation." She stalked out, heels clicking on the patio tile, past a row of neighbors now watching her like they'd just realized the emperor had no clothes and maybe never did. That night, Greg and I sat on his porch with a couple of lawn chairs and a six-pack. We watched a tow truck haul away Cheryl's Escalade for unpaid fines. A few neighbors clapped. "Think she'll end up in court?" Greg asked. "She might," I said. "But even if she doesn't, she's done here." He nodded, then pointed toward my garden. "You gonna replant those tomatoes?" I gave a slow nod. "Yeah, but I think this time I'll add a little sign." "What's it gonna say?" I took a long drink. "Private property. Trespassers will be documented." And we both laughed, the kind that comes after a long, ridiculous, but ultimately satisfying war. The following week brought a strange calm over the neighborhood, like the stillness after a thunderstorm. Cheryl's absence was noticeable. No flyers taped to doors, no early morning patrols, and no sudden emergency board sessions in her backyard. Her Escalade hadn't returned either. Most assumed it was impounded, though no one asked directly. People were walking their dogs a little slower, chatting longer at mailboxes. It was like the neighborhood exhaled. But I knew better than to think it was over. On Thursday, I received a letter from an unfamiliar law firm. Not hand-delivered like Cheryl's usual antics, this one came through certified mail. The envelope was thick, formal. Inside was a cease and desist letter claiming I had deliberately created a public hazard with malicious intent, and that Cheryl Whitmore was pursuing civil damages for emotional distress and vehicular sabotage. I read it twice, then once more for amusement. No mention of the forged signatures, the garden destruction, or the midnight trash dumping incident. Just a very dramatic retelling of how she feared for her safety after a tire mysteriously exploded on my property. It was signed by a junior partner from a downtown firm known more for ambulance chasing than winning cases. I called the city attorney's office for advice. They were already familiar with the situation. The zoning complaint had triggered a broader investigation, and Cheryl was now being looked at for possible wire fraud and misappropriation of HOA funds. They advised me not to respond directly and assured me that if it escalated, they had documentation ready. Still, just to be thorough, I visited the local courthouse and filed a protective declaration of property boundaries, complete with the original plat map and a notarized letter from the county office. It was tedious work, but necessary. I wasn't going to give her or her lawyer a millimeter of leverage. 2 days later, a new wrinkle appeared. A man in khakis and a navy blazer showed up at my door. He introduced himself as Investigator Raymond Chen from the district attorney's office. Calm voice, clipped words. He carried a small notepad and wore a badge discreetly clipped to his belt. "I'm following up on a complaint," he said. "We've received multiple statements alleging misuse of HOA funds by a Cheryl Whitmore. You're listed as a key witness." I invited him in, offered him coffee, which he politely declined. We sat at the dining table while I pulled out the binder again, now twice as thick, with new tabs and printed emails. "She claimed this was common land," I said, flipping to the page with the property map. "But this is the original survey from when I bought the house. I never signed anything transferring rights." He nodded, jotting something down. "And the spikes, decorative edging," I said without hesitation. "No sharper than a garden stake. Buried shallow, painted for visibility." I even warned her after the first time she drove through. She claimed it was sabotage. She also claimed I violated HOA landscaping standards because my grass was too long by half an inch. He gave a brief huff, which might have been a laugh. "We've already found irregularities in the HOA's financial records. Landscaping services billed to non-existent parcels. Several checks endorsed by Cheryl that shouldn't have been. The trash dumping incident only added fuel. I've got video evidence of that. From my neighbor's security cam. Already submitted, along with statements from 4 other residents, including a former board member who claims Cheryl threatened to revoke their voting rights. Every answer I gave seemed to make his pen move faster. Before he left, he handed me a card and told me to expect a subpoena if the case went to court. which, according to him, was looking increasingly likely. The next week, subpoenas were delivered across the neighborhood. Cheryl's name was on all of them. Then came a twist no one expected. A former treasurer of the HOA, Rhonda, a quiet woman who lived on a corner lot with 3 cats and a rain barrel system, came forward with a flash drive. It contained a spreadsheet going back 3 years, showing every HOA transaction. She'd kept it for her own records after Cheryl dismissed her suddenly last spring. The data was damning. Inflated maintenance charges, double payments to a landscaping company that didn't exist, and a series of payments listed under security improvements that clearly went straight into a private account. One of those entries was dated the same week Cheryl installed a wrought iron gate at the end of her driveway. Rhonda handed it all over to investigator Chen. Within 48 hours, a warrant was issued. The arrest happened discreetly, early on a Tuesday morning. No sirens. Just 2 unmarked cars parked outside Cheryl's house while officers entered with folders in hand. She was led out in a tan hoodie and slippers, flanked by 2 detectives. Her Escalade was finally back, parked on the curb with a new paint job matte silver, but it didn't save her. They towed it again, this time as evidence. The charges: falsifying official documents, wire fraud, criminal misappropriation of community funds, and obstruction of a zoning investigation. The last one caught her off guard, apparently. She hadn't realized the city had been keeping tabs on her amendments since the year prior. Her lawyer dropped the civil suit against me the next day, probably realizing it would only dig her deeper. With her removed, the HOA was left leaderless. Not that anyone missed her. But there was still the issue of what to do next. Without a functioning board, the association couldn't operate. Fees had stopped being collected, maintenance requests stacked up, and the community gardens were starting to look wild. That's when people started showing up on my porch. First it was Marcy, the one who'd spoken out at the last meeting. Then Greg. Then Alois, who brought cookies. They all said the same thing: someone needed to step in. Someone who actually read the bylaws, kept receipts, and didn't threaten to revoke shuttle privileges. I said no at first. I wasn't interested in politics, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If we didn't take control, someone like Cheryl could come right back in. The HOA structure wasn't going away, but maybe it didn't have to be the enemy, so we called a meeting. No backyard thrones. Just folding chairs in the community park. We handed out ballots, tallied votes in the open, and elected a temporary board. Marcy took president. Greg, treasurer. Alois, surprisingly sharp with numbers, took over as secretary. They asked me to serve as compliance officer. I agreed on one condition. We install community cameras at every entrance and all footage be accessible to homeowners. Full transparency. The vote passed unanimously. The first thing we did: revoke every policy Cheryl had ever tried to pass without a quorum. The second: allocate funds to replant my garden, plus reimburse everyone she'd find under false pretenses. The third: freeze the account she'd used for beautification. 3 weeks later, a city council liaison visited our neighborhood to observe the changes. She stayed for an hour, took notes, and left impressed. We were even nominated for a civic improvement grant. Apparently, we'd become a model for how communities could take back control from mismanaged associations. One evening, as I was hammering in a new trellis for my cucumber vines, Rhonda stopped by. "You know," she said, watching me work, "I always thought this place had potential, just needed someone to dig their heels in." I nodded. Sometimes it takes a little pressure to get things growing the right direction. She smiled, then glanced toward the little sign I'd posted at the garden's edge. It was made of weathered wood now, hand-painted in white letters: private property. Documented, verified, and watched. Rhonda chuckled. "Can I get one of those for my roses?" I handed her a brush. "Paint it yourself. It means more that way." By the time the new board settled into their roles, the neighborhood had started to feel like a place people actually wanted to live again. The kind of place where folks waved from porches, where kids played hopscotch on the sidewalks without someone measuring chalk residue with a ruler. But even with Cheryl out and the HOA under new leadership, something still didn't sit right. It started with a routine audit of the HOA's digital records. Greg, now acting treasurer, had been combing through the old financial software Cheryl used. He called me over one evening, flicking through folders on a dusty old laptop the board had recovered from the HOA storage shed, locked, of course, and only accessible because Alois found the key taped under a loose brick beside Cheryl's former patio bar. "She kept everything on here," Greg said. "But look at this." He showed me a series of expense entries labeled permit preparation with amounts that kept rising month by month. The amounts were suspicious: $1,400 here, $2,200 there, and they were all attributed to a consulting firm no one had ever heard of. "Riverstone Municipal Strategy Group," Greg read aloud. "Ever heard of them?" I hadn't, so we dug deeper. The company's mailing address led to a UPS drop box in a strip mall 3 towns over. No website, no phone listing, no registered business license in the county. "This isn't a vendor," I said. "It's a shell," Greg nodded. "And it gets worse." He clicked into a folder labeled Project Sundown. Inside were PDFs detailing proposed blueprints, legal filings, and email drafts, emails Cheryl never sent. They were addressed to someone named Dustin Talbot. The subject lines were all variations of Subdivision Phase 2 and Zoning Clearance Request. She was planning to build, I said. Not just build, expand. She wanted to annex the lots behind the eastern fence line, turn the greenbelt into new homes. I leaned in. That'd require city approval. Environmental impact studies, public hearings. Greg clicked open one last file. It was a scan of a forged approval letter stamped with the city's seal, dated 6 months ago. She faked the whole thing. The next morning, I drove to the zoning office downtown. I met with the same clerk who'd helped me with the initial property line verification. When I showed him the scan, his eyebrows climbed so high they nearly vanished into his hairline. "This isn't one of ours," he said. "And that signature. That's not even close to the director's." He stepped out for a moment, returned with a supervisor, and within 20 minutes, I was sitting in a small gray room across from 2 city investigators. They asked me questions: where the file came from, who had access, how long Cheryl had been in charge, and I answered every one. Then I handed over the flash drive Greg had backed up. By that afternoon, Cheryl wasn't just under investigation for HOA fraud. She was now facing charges for forging municipal documents and attempting to illegally initiate residential development. The city forwarded everything to the county prosecutor. Word spread fast. At the next board meeting, every seat was filled. People stood along the fence line, whispering in disbelief. Marcy opened the floor with a printed statement from the city confirming the investigation's expansion. No one interrupted. No one spoke until she finished reading. Then, from the back, a man in a green windbreaker raised his hand. "My wife and I signed a petition Cheryl brought around last year," he said. "She told us it was for traffic calming measures. Now I'm thinking..." He trailed off. Another neighbor spoke up, then another. One by one, residents admitted they'd been misled, coerced, or outright duped into signing things they didn't understand. The kicker came when a woman named Janice, who'd only lived here a year, stood and said Cheryl had offered her a discounted HOA rate in exchange for signing over temporary access to her side yard. She said it was for community improvement, Janice said. Then someone came and dug up 3 feet of my flower bed without notice. Greg and Marcy took down every statement. They compiled a report and submitted it directly to the district attorney's office. 2 weeks later, Cheryl was indicted on 7 counts, including forgery, misuse of community funds, and unlawful land use planning. The forged city document alone carried a felony charge. She tried to claim ignorance, that someone else had created the file and she'd merely kept a copy, but the metadata from the laptop told a different story. She'd created the file at 2:43 a.m. on a Thursday using her HOA login credentials. Her trial didn't take long. The prosecution brought in city officials, homeowners, and a digital forensic expert who broke down every keystroke. Cheryl sat in silence most of the time, her lawyer whispering occasionally, but the jury didn't need convincing. She was found guilty on all counts. Sentenced to 26 months in county jail, 5 years probation, and ordered to pay restitution to the HOA over $35,000 in damages. We never saw her again. In the months that followed, the neighborhood transformed. Rhonda returned as treasurer, this time with full board approval. Alois started a community garden initiative. Greg and I installed a public bulletin board near the mailboxes, where people could post garage sale flyers, lost pet photos, and most importantly transcripts from every board meeting. Full transparency became the rule, not the exception. The HOA's new charter was ratified with a 68% vote, eliminating automatic fines and replacing them with a peer-reviewed system. Violations now required physical evidence, reviewed by 3 rotating members of the compliance panel. The fence around my garden stayed. I rebuilt the trellises, planted new tomatoes, and added a row of peppers with bright red blossoms. No one touched them. One afternoon, as I was watering the soil, Greg biked over and leaned against my mailbox. "You hear about the grant?" I turned down the hose. "What grant?" "City's giving us $15,000 for community restoration. Says we're a model for grassroots governance." I laughed. "We went from HOA horror story to civic poster child," he grinned. "Apparently, planting spikes in your garden counts as community activism now." I shook my head, but I couldn't help smiling. "Just don't let it go to your head." He pointed toward the little wooden sign still perched at the edge of the soil. "Think you'll ever take that down?" I glanced at it. The paint had started to fade, but the letters were still legible: private property. Documented, verified, and watched. "Not a chance," I said. "It's part of the history now." That evening, I sat on the porch with a cold drink and watched the sun dip behind the rooftops. Kids rode scooters down the sidewalk. A couple walked by with their dog, nodded politely. Somewhere, someone was grilling, and for the first time in a long while, this place felt like home. Not just a house, not just a street with matching mailboxes, but a real, lived-in neighborhood. One that had been through a storm and come out cleaner on the other side. All it had taken was a buried spike, a binder full of receipts, and a community that finally decided enough was enough.